not exaggerate the adverse effect of the Jubilee River. We would have flooded anyway in 2003, 2014 and 2024, but I believe slightly less severely. We have some guests, some who have come some distance tonight. We have the Wraysbury Flood Team, led by Dave Francis. We have the Environment Agency, led by Joe Cuthbertson, over here. We have RBWM, the Royal Borough, led by Chris Joyce, who's just behind me here, and Thames Water, who are responsible for sewage. Danny Lehman is their leader, and they're at this end of the table. So I'm very grateful for them all to come. The plan for the meeting is, first of all, when I've finished rambling on myself, to invite the guests in turn to explain their involvement in the flood event we recently had. Then there'll be questions from the public. We've invited people to submit written questions, and we've got quite a number, about 27, is it?
We're going to get through them.
Yes. That's going to be handled from the microphone, which is controlled by Councillor Darren Leverty there in the middle of the hall. Then, if we have time, we will have questions from the floor. Then there's a presentation by Councillor Ewan Larkham. And then we're going to have votes on 3 motions. One about the reinstatement of Channel 1 of the Lower Thames Flood Alleviation Scheme. 2, the resumption of dredging between Romney Weir and Bell Weir. And 3, the clearance of the Wraysbury Drain and the other minor watercourses in Wraysbury. I must ask that everyone treats our guests with respect and courtesy. They're on our side and they're here to help us. I'm sure everyone present, including all of our guests, believes that the reinstatement of Channel 1 of the Lower Thames Flood Alleviation Scheme is the only way to provide adequate protection for Datchet, Horton, Old Windsor and Wraysbury in the long term. I'm sure the Environment Agency and Royal Borough officers who are present would love to build us this channel if the politicians were to provide the money. It was RBWM politicians who failed to provide the required finance, something over 50 million, I believe, which led to the construction of Channel 1 being cancelled. This decision was taken by the previous administration, who lost office in May. The current administration were not responsible for that and have inherited a very poor financial situation. As Theresa May said, there's no magic money tree, so please don't give our guests a hard time. And after that, I will hand over to who's going to be first. Dave Francis of our flood team. I must say, Dave and the team, I watched what they were doing in fairly close quarters, went to all the meetings. I think they did a magnificent job. So over to you, Dave.
Thank you, Phil. I'm going to turn my back on you guys, if you don't mind. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
I find myself in unfamiliar territory speaking to you all in public, so please bear with me as I give you a brief summary of my role and some thank yous. For all of those of you that have moved to the village in the last 10 years and have never experienced a flood, you simply cannot comprehend it until you experience it. Some might not have known the village had a flood warden or even a flood team. I, as flood warden, a role which was handed down to me voluntarily through generations, born and raised in the village, I have a lifetime of local knowledge, living, eating and working in the village for so many years, and this is where I am recognised by emergency planning as the borough's eyes and ears. I worked for Manor Farm for 5 years on the local fields where I learnt so much how important our ditches and drains were to basically drain the fields to grow the crops and for the cattle. My role is to keep an eye on the river levels and report to both residents and emergency planning at the borough when the river reaches a level of concern, when flooding is likely from both the river and from groundwater. In the 2003 floods, as a group of volunteers joined with me and we formed the flood team to assist residents in the time of need. That year too I experienced what it was like to be flooded as my family home in Friary Road took in water, and when the 2014 floods came, even worse, we lost it for good. Sadly, some of the original flood team members, one of the original flood team members are no longer with us, but all of the current team are here today, part of the 2014 team, so I'd like to introduce the team to you, if you don't already know them. So we're sort of known as the foot soldiers in the flood team. So there's myself, and then there's Andy Moran, Ollie Sanders, Nick Carter, whose son Fred can't here tonight. There's Mick West, who works for me. He doesn't even live in the village, but he's been by my side since 2003 with it all. And then of course there's my son Ollie, who was only 15 in 2014. We are the guys who wade through the water day and night, checking water levels, checking on our vulnerable, evacuating anyone where necessary, delivering medical supplies, getting carers in and out of properties, and even delivering shopping if a necessity, along with helping with Wraysbury voluntary care lunches if they cannot reach the properties that are deeply flooded. What we are not here to do in a flood is deal with such things as move people's cars, retie your boat lines, and move your garden furniture. We're not even Uber Eats. Backing us up is the admin team that we've sort of formed. Mark Foster, who sadly is on his way at the moment, he's flown in from Denmark tonight and he should be here a bit later on. So there's Mark Foster that's sort of our coordinator, along with my wife Jo, Laura Cherry Andrews and Mike Williams. Now they are the ones who answer the phones, liaise with the voluntary care team, coordinate the flood soldiers when need be, and once the authorities' emergency service arrive, they deal with them too. Until we are stood down like this year, rather than working with us like in 2014, we also have Simon Carter of Wraysbury Voluntary Care, along with Karen Sanders from the chemist, and Di Crammer, who without them we would not know are vulnerable in the village. I would like to thank the recently elected Parish Council for their support. Borough Councillors Jodie Grove and David Buckley, who were in constant contact with us, popping into the hub and seeing if they could bring anything to the table. My thanks also go to the lockkeeper Phil at Belware and Carolyn Richardson of Emergency Planning at Royal Borough Windsor Maidwood, who is the one that I answer to, who will always keep us updated with as much information that was true and factual. We did get some criticism that we weren't giving out enough signals or giving out enough messages. We will only give you the facts as we know them. Thanks, Caroline and Phil. And last but not least, I thank all of those that help, whether it be manning road closures, making tea and coffees at the hub, or just generally checking and looking after their neighbours. We all play a significant part in keeping our residents safe, and this is why Wraysbury is so unique. For years and years, our village has been forgotten, neglected and abandoned by the powers above. To have 4 floods in 21 years just goes to show how it needs to stop right now. The powers above have been talking the talk for decades, and now it's a long time that they walk the walk. We need to remember every flood is different, but we have to ask ourselves why. From flood bank defences being removed, which there is no law to keep them, from planning and enforcement not doing their jobs properly, they really need to get their act together. Not long now. And also to the ditches and water courses being mismanaged and unmaintained for years. To the rich cats that extracted our gravel in the 60s and 70s, making an absolute fortune, leaving us surrounded with water and with the possibility of the river and lakes joining, along with the diversions of our crucial ditches. To broken promises from the borough regards to the unblocking of the Wraysbury drain at Hythe End and the withdrawal of our village from the RTS scheme. And finally, the EA for stopping the dredging of the Thames and any general maintenance years ago. This needs to be reinstated immediately so the river holds more water, as the RTS scheme is never going to be finished in my lifetime. As Phil said to you earlier, I would like to ask you all to be mindful. These representatives have come here today to try and answer your questions. They're not here to take a barrel of abuse. It's time that we work with them and they work with us and listen to the people on the ground. If they can't answer your question, please write on one of the postcards, which are on the 3 tables at the back, your question, along with your contact details, pop it in one of the bowls, and I'm sure they will try their best to get back to you with an answer. If they don't, get hold of Karen Clark. Finally, remember one thing, Wraysbury, as a village we are in this together and we'll always be in it together. Thank you.
What you say. Next up is the Environment Agency, Joe Cuthbertson.
Makes Joe go down there if that's all right. If you like. Good evening, everybody. I'm Joe Cuthbertson from the Environment Agency, and I've got my colleague Maria here to support with some of the questions later. Can I just start by saying thank you to Dave for setting up the opening so well there. I had some really positive feedback from a number of colleagues about how well operated the flood team were and our community information officers, many of whom were out and about talking to members of the community a couple of weeks ago, said how impressed they were by it, and I just wanted to echo that. It's a really, really impressive community effort, and thank you. So I'm just going to give a brief overview from our perspective at the Environment Agency about our role, the recent flooding that we've seen and what we're doing about it, and we'll be very happy to answer any of your questions. The main thing I want to do today really is to listen, to answer questions as best as we can, and as Dave said, to take away any that we can't, and I will get back to you, make sure that we get back to you on all of them. First up though, the most important thing I want to say is to extend my sympathy to anyone who's been impacted by flooding recently, which I know is many of you, whether that was directly or indirectly. I do work with many communities who suffer the impacts of flooding, and I do recognise from all those conversations and visits to flooded homes just how devastating that is. And I would really like to extend my sympathy and that of my colleagues for all of you who've experienced that. So in terms of the Environment Agency's role, so our role is, in terms of flood risk, is leading on looking at ways to manage flood risk from main rivers and the sea. Main rivers includes the River Thames, and it includes those larger rivers throughout the country, throughout England. What that means in practice is a whole range of different activities that we carry out. So we lead on providing input to planning applications where people apply for planning permission in areas at risk of flooding, and typically will object, and over the last 20 years or so those objections are listened to by local planning authorities in between 97 and 98% of cases. Sometimes those applications are for redevelopment, which is for places that are already developed in a floodplain, and in those cases we work to ensure that redevelopment can take place in a way that makes it more resilient to the effects of flooding in the future. We have a big role in terms of flood mapping, understanding risk and sharing information about that risk with communities, businesses, insurance companies. Understanding whether you're at risk and being able to take action in advance of flooding happening is, in areas without flood defences, is the single biggest thing that can be done to reduce the financial impact and the mental distress associated with flooding. It can't be underplayed. You're an extremely aware, well-engaged community on flood risks, that's why we're here tonight. But it's a big part of what we do, and that mapping, that understanding is really important for that awareness. We also build and develop flood alleviation schemes. We can't do that everywhere. In the recent flooding, we predict that our estimates are that we protected around 11,000 homes just in the Thames Valley from flooding that would otherwise not have flooded were it not for our schemes, partner schemes, and the operational actions we take. We can't do that everywhere, as I said, but we look to protect the most people and businesses that we can. We do it where it's viable, and we've got a plan in place working with Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead and others to see what options are viable in this area, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that tonight. And just briefly, in terms of our incident response role, we also react and respond to flooding, providing information to our partners in the local resilience forum to make sure there's an effective multi-agency response, that people understand where the hotspots are, that resources can be directed to where they're most needed. We issue flood alerts and warnings in advance of flooding occurring, where that flooding comes from main river, much more tricky for groundwater and surface water and other sources which we can touch on. That warning and informing, as I touched on, does give valuable time to prepare, reduce the impacts of flooding, and that's a really key part of our response. And we play a big operational role. You will have probably seen, there's already been mention of a lock keeper. We open all the weirs on the River Thames to allow the water to flow freely. We do that early as the river levels are rising, so the water is in a natural state as it's flowing downstream. We operate our flood defence assets, including the Jubilee Flood Relief Channel, which I'll touch on in just a second. And we clear blockages, we respond to calls from the public, we send out community information officers to talk to you, to understand what's going on the ground, to offer advice and support. So there's a whole range of these activities that we take place. That's our role. We'll hear from others here about the respective roles of other authorities shortly. And just briefly in terms of the flood and our actions, including on the Jubilee Flood Relief Channel. So the flooding we've seen recently was quite different to some of the other floods we've seen over the last 20 years or so. We have had, between July and December, the wettest 6-month period on record for England since records began in 1889. So we came into the autumn and winter with everything already very saturated. And then we saw some very heavy and widespread rain on the 4th of January over a period of hours, which initially caused surface water flooding, which is where there's too much water for drains to soak the water away quickly enough. That then quickly went into all the tributaries, so the rivers that feed the River Thames, and then made its way down the Thames. I've heard a lot of people talk about how fast this flood appeared to happen, and it is the case that it's quite different to some of the previous floods where we've had rainfall after rainfall after rainfall, sort of day by day, but relatively small amounts. We saw a big slug of rain come all in one go on the 4th of January, and then that took several days, but actually relatively quick compared to what we've seen in recent years as that passed down the Thames. That started to impact communities, low-lying houses, particularly riverside properties, along the whole length of the River Thames, both upstream and downstream of the Jubilee River, the Jubilee Flood Relief Channel. We operated the Jubilee starting on the 31st of December. You've already described what I'll say here, but I do want to really make this point, and I'm not going to be apologetic about the flood defence. The Jubilee is designed to take the water that is coming down the Thames and provide additional capacity in the area around Maidenhead, Windsor and Eton to reduce the risk of flooding to around 3,000 homes in that area. We don't build flood alleviation schemes that increase flood risk to others. We're not allowed to do it. It's prohibited by planning. We have to prove when we seek planning permission that it won't do that. I know that I'm saying this to a number of you who don't believe this, but I have to say it. I want to get that message across. I have heard people talk about intentional flooding of some communities at the expense of others, and I just really want to set that to rest. That is not something that we would ever do. The people who work at the Environment Agency have come here to help support the environment and support villages and communities like yourselves. So I just really want to set that straight, and I'm sure we'll have questions about it.
Can we ask questions now, or do we need to ask at the end?
We're going to come to questions, I believe, after we've just done a couple more of these, and I'm very nearly done on my bit, but yeah, happy to take those questions. So we operated the Jubilee, we operate it in increments, so we let step by step, we open the gates more and more, basically, and more water goes down the Jubilee Flood Relief Channel, comes out of the Thames at Taplow and then goes back into the Thames just upstream of Datchet. We operated it to its maximum capacity during this flooding, which is relatively rare. So it operated to maximum capacity with the last gate movement being in the morning on Sunday the 7th of January, when it operated at maximum capacity for a number of, for some hours and days, and then we gradually, as the water levels in the Thames subsided, closed in those gates, and it's gone back to normal operation as a result. The areas that are protected.
The areas that were cut, you know, the
So-
ones that we protected.
So no one was sacrificed for.
Sorry, we were.
But the
We're going to have questions later.
Yeah.
Please let him say his
Yeah.
piece, and let the other people say theirs.
So Maidenhead and Windsor and Eton are the areas that
Yeah,
are
right, so the other ones you
benefited
said.
by the
Yeah,
by
that's fair
the
enough.
by the scheme.
That's what I wanted an answer to.
So in terms of next steps, we're now carrying out debriefs, looking at what happened in terms of the flooding. We always review our response and that alongside our partners, because there's always, with any emergency response, there are aspects that you can learn from, aspects that you can improve. That includes looking at all the data, reviewing the river levels, reviewing the warnings that we issued, of which there were 73 just in the River Thames catchment during this recent flooding. That's the most we've seen for some time. We're looking at what we can do to improve that in future, and critically, we're still working closely on the Datchet to High End Flood Improvement Measures project, which again we can touch on more, which I'm aware many of, well, some of you will have been at some of the drop-ins that we held in the autumn in Datchet and here in Wraysbury. I'm very happy to touch on that. That is the project that we are working on with RBWM and others to look at ways to reduce flood risk here in the future. But final point from me, to reiterate the point, we can't stop all flooding. We do it where it makes sense economically, we do it where we can. We want to help the most people that we can, but we haven't got a duty to stop all flooding from happening. We just look to find ways to do it where the need is there and where people are supportive of it. So I want to make a commitment that my teams are going to continue working with you on the Datchet to High End Flood Improvement Measures project, understand your preferences. There'll be more engagement coming later this year. I'd urge you to get close to that, engage with that, give us your views, because without your support and your input, we're not going to be able to develop something that's effective and that works for everybody. So that's my intro for today.
Sorry, without your
Thank
support,
you.
yeah, without your,
Thanks very much, Joe. Appreciate it. As I say, we'll have questions later, so please don't interrupt the speakers. Next up is Thames Water, which is Danny Lehman. Thank you, Danny. Do you want to do it from here?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Danny Lehman. I'm the Waste Operations Director for this area's Thames Water. I was here in 2014 and spoke to some of you back then. I was hoping I wouldn't have to come back and have this conversation. So again, I extend my sympathies for the challenges that you've faced once again over the last few weeks. And I'd also like to apologise for anything that we've done to add to that stress and anxiety over the last couple of weeks, because I can only imagine what it's like to have your house flooded in the way that's happened over the last couple of weeks, but to then not have waste services in some cases, or to see contamination in the local area of sewage in that water. It's not nice, and it's not something that we're proud of, and it's something that we work really hard to try and obviously address. And I'm hopefully over the next few minutes I can try and provide a little bit of context around what's happened from our perspective, what happened in 2014 and what we tried to do to improve the situation, and then really keen to understand your thoughts and feedback so that we can learn from what's happened this time around and try to improve again over the coming years to try and reduce the level of impact where we can. And I'll try and provide a bit of context on that if I may. We saw, as was explained, we saw similar challenges right back to September, where we've seen much higher than average rainfall for each of the winter months so far. So it's been a period of stress on the waste side of the business for a number of months, but actually one that's been controlled relatively well. We've had some areas that have started to suffer from groundwater infiltration as groundwater levels have come up, particularly around Oxford and Reading. And then gradually we've seen that come down river this way over the last month or so. culminating in the flooding that we've seen on the Thames and on the tributaries of the Thames. So from a sort of, in terms of putting that into perspective, from a waste business perspective, we saw, I mean, put it into context, we've got about 350 sewage treatment works. 98% of them are in the home counties and Thames Valley, so outside of London essentially. 3/4 of them were overloaded with flow in the beginning of January, coming out of Christmas, because of the culmination of those high groundwater levels and because of the heavy rains that we'd seen from the named storms. We had 671 pumping stations that were overloaded, and we've been obviously working hard to try to respond to that where best we can, to try and in many cases just be literally trying to pump floodwaters and obviously try to get as much of our sewage into the system as we can. And I'll try and explain why that's a challenge for us and what we try to do to prevent that from happening in these areas that are at risk of particularly groundwater penetration, but also then with rivers bursting their banks, etc. So at the beginning of January, we've obviously seen the rivers burst their banks, and that's created some challenges for us. And one of the things that we often have the predicament with is where do we put our resources? Because as I say, in many cases we're just pumping river, and it's very difficult to then understand what do we do in order to try and maintain service, to prevent contamination, and then really where the main part of our job comes in, which is trying to get things back working to normal as quickly as possible. So as soon as those waters reside, how can we get back to providing a normal service? And that's very much the situation in Wraysbury. For those of you who are here talking back in 2014, one of the biggest challenges we had with the waste service is that the floodwaters damaged our equipment. So it damaged the pumping stations, it damaged the sewage system in this area. So not only was there disruption for the period of the actual flood itself, but then it took many, many weeks to recover services. So the stress and the anxiety that you were suffering went on for many weeks. And what we did, and we said that we would do at the time, and when I spoke to some of you at the time, was that we would look to try and improve resilience in our system so that we can't stop the floodwaters getting in, and I'll explain why. But what we'd look to do is make it more resilient so that it doesn't cause the damage that then extends the period of pain for weeks to come. So we invested back in 2014 to put flood preventions around our pumping stations, largely at Wraysbury Road and at the Avenue. We, for those of you who are aware, it's quite an unusual system in this area actually. It's called a vacuum system, and that's because the area here is very flat. And therefore, in order to extract the sewage from your houses, we have a vacuum system that effectively sucks it from a pit outside your house, which I'm sure some of you will be aware of. So we installed a new vacuum system back in 2014 because the vacuum system at the time that was installed by the local authority before it came into privatisation and handed over to us, it didn't work underwater effectively, and therefore we installed new technology, new heads in the vacuum system to ensure that it could continue to work once it was flooded. So they were the two key things that we did at the time, so to try and protect the assets so they didn't get damaged from the floodwaters. What's happened on this occasion is that largely that's been successful, and it's proven successful, but I'll explain why. So the vacuum system at Wraysbury, for example, continued to work all the way through the flooding on this occasion. However, obviously with the level of river water that we've got, the system's completely overloaded with river water getting into the system, and therefore whilst it's running, it's largely pumping river water rather than your sewage. And what that means is that your sewage systems will back up, you won't be able to get out of your houses, and therefore your services get affected. And what will then happen is it will come out of drains both on our assets and on your assets. It means it comes out and then will mix in with the river water and cause a level of contamination which you will have seen. But what it does mean is once the floodwaters have resided, the Wraysbury, the Avenue system is working perfectly, and it's worked all the way throughout. So in a way, and it's a small success. It's a success in the sense that we haven't seen that prolonged impact for a number of days after the floodwaters have gone. Wraysbury Road, in a similar sense, we had a flood barrier there. The flood barrier didn't hold in the way that we would have liked. So obviously it's not been tested since 2014 fully, but we did have some water ingress, but the system continued to run. So the vacuum system itself continued to operate, but we did make a decision to sacrifice a part of that system because of the level of overloading of river water that impacted that part of the system. So we had more flood water get into the Friary Road system, so it continued to run even though it was impacted by flood waters. And that meant that part of the system was still operating and pumping throughout, and part of it we made a decision to sacrifice to protect the rest of the system. Incredibly difficult decision to make. And then we brought in tankers to make sure that we could take the sewage out of the vacuum pits in that part of the area. So we will now reflect on the learnings that have come out of the last couple of weeks. We need to do some work at Friary Road to ensure that the flood defences are more robust. And then again we will reflect on what's happened to try and understand what more we can do to try and prevent, say as best we can, the river waters from getting into the system. So it doesn't damage it, as it's done in this case, and therefore the systems continue to perform well, but we need to try and limit the amount of river water that gets in, and God forbid, touch wood, hopefully we'll never be in this situation again. But it's quite a difficult challenge because, as you're probably aware, the waste system is specifically designed to be a vented system. It's not sealed, it's not watertight, and therefore when the river does burst its bank or groundwater levels come up, the river water will get into the system. And as I say, it gets in through a number of different routes, through manhole covers that we use to maintain our system. It'll get in through your own private manholes that you've got on your property, or it'll get through cracks and areas of weakness in the system. Now, in the case of a vacuum system, actually, it's a sealed system. It has to work in the sense that it has to be able to cause a vacuum. So, in that sense, it's actually less susceptible to groundwater infiltration. But the manholes are not, and that's where the water gets in, and that's what causes both the issues with overloading the system, but also the contamination that you'll see in the area. So we need to look at what more we can do to try and prevent that happening. But say it's not an easy fix because we would literally need to seal everything on our side and you would need to seal everything on your side to stop the water getting in the first place. And so the system's not designed to do that. So that's something we need to reflect on and think, what more can we do to ensure that your services are maintained throughout, but also so we don't get the contamination. One of the questions we get in these circumstances is obviously the risk around contamination. So here the level of contamination of the sewage water will be heavily diluted, so I know it's not pleasant. I know in some cases you may get things that are in your property or gardens, etc., that you wouldn't like to see, whether that's paper or sanitary products or whatever. And therefore, that's something that, although it doesn't look nice, actually the public health risk is relatively low because of the level of dilution. It will take a couple of weeks before any contamination risk will cease, but then there's obviously the debris that may be left. And that's largely what we do in these circumstances, is to try and remove as much of the sewage debris that we can. But there's the risk in terms of going around and disinfecting to try and remove contamination is a low risk. So that's largely where we're at the moment, and again I would welcome any comments, feedback. You gave us excellent feedback last time. We tried to act on that as best we can, and we'll do likewise on this occasion. So again, I pass on my sympathies for obviously the very challenging couple of weeks that you've had, and so look forward to any questions that you've got after the next section. Thank you.
Very much, Danny. Next up is Chris Joyce from the Royal Borough.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to everyone. My name is Chris Joyce, and I'm one of the Assistant Directors at the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead. So my service includes the Joint Emergency Planning Unit and the flooding team, and many of the people who are involved in the response to the most recent flooding incident and the recovery phase that follows. I'll try not to repeat what other colleagues have said. I think Joe gave a good overview of the incident, but I'll try and give a bit more information around the borough's response to the flooding. So firstly, I want to say thank you for coming this evening. I appreciate it's been a difficult start to the year for many people in the community. And we recognise that in a fast-moving emergency response, we can't get everything right. And I welcome the opportunity to answer some of the questions that people have got, and anything that we can't answer this evening, we'll take away and make sure we get answers. So over the coming weeks and months, we want to work with communities to learn lessons from this response, to improve our response to future events. As of earlier today, we had around 200 properties across the borough that have reported as being impacted by flooding, including almost 80 that have been internally flooded. And I just encourage anyone who hasn't reported their property to the borough to do so through our flooding inquiries mailbox. It's really important in terms of us understanding, being able to investigate those floods, but also in terms of potential future government grants and eligibility. So we understand at the moment anyone who hasn't officially reported their property as flooding wouldn't be eligible for those grants. So I'd really encourage anyone to come forward. On the 3rd of January, the council started its preparations for potential flooding, and on the 4th of January, the Thames Valley Local Resilience Forum stood up its multi-agency tactical coordination, strategic coordination groups. This effectively brings together colleagues from local authorities, emergency services, utilities companies to work together to respond to the incident. And on the 5th of January, this was declared as a major incident across the Thames Valley. Throughout, we tried to provide regular communications with twice daily updates to parishes and ward councillors to try and provide the best possible information to people as it was becoming available from other partners. So a virtual emergency operations centre was set up over the weekend of the 6th and 7th of January to enable the council to monitor and respond to issues as they arose. And on Monday the 8th of January, the physical emergency operations centre was set up in Tinkers Lane Depot. Based on some of the local intelligence we were getting from the team on the ground in Wraysbury, and also some of the concerns around the uncertainty of how the floodwater was behaving, colleagues from emergency services co-located with the council that evening to coordinate a potential evacuation from Wraysbury. This was clearly a difficult decision, but it was based on significant uncertainty and the potential for vulnerable residents to be flooded, and therefore making the evacuations much more difficult if that floodwater had started to take over the village as potentially forecasted. So alternative accommodation was secured and a rest centre was set up in Windsor Leisure Centre, and there were colleagues on the ground to support the needs of vulnerable residents, particularly from our adult social care team. As the water levels remained high for a significant period of time, we worked with colleagues from both the Environment Agency and Thames Water to resolve ongoing problems with sewage as well as floodwaters that were draining slowly. And that was particularly working with ward and parish councillors where residents were coming forward to identify specific issues in their properties. And we had teams on the ground to support both from our flooding teams and also from our communities teams to engage and understand the position on the ground. As the water levels began to stabilise and reduce, we were able to stand down the Emergency Operations Centre and transition to the recovery phase. So this work is focused on 3 key areas. So the neighbourhood services recovery, so focused on cleaning and reopening roads, recovering services such as bin collection and flooded parks. The flooding recovery, ensuring we've accurately recorded the impacted properties and started the statutory process of investigations across the borough. And also the lessons learned process. And there will be a process to ensure we understand how we improve responses to future incidents. We want everyone to have their opportunity to feed their views into this process, and there will be 2 stages. There will be an initial debrief process over the next few weeks to learn immediate lessons, and this will involve meetings with all affected parishes, flood wardens and local ward councillors. Over the next couple of months, there will be a longer, more detailed debrief process happening at both local and regional level. At the end of last week, the Council wrote to the government to confirm that we had reached the 50 property threshold that would trigger the flood recovery framework funding. We're expecting further details to come through on eligibility and guidance, and as soon as we're in position to do so, we'll share further details on how residents and businesses can apply. I look forward to the opportunity to answer some of the questions, and I'll pass back to the Chair.
Thank you very much, Chris. Disentangle the wires. So it's questions next, and so I hand over to Councillor Levity.
Okay, so what we're going to do, there's about 50 questions come in, and we consolidated down to about 20. Listening to a lot of this, I've consolidated down further and tweaked a bit and seeking clarification on a few bits as well. I'm going to try to get through these, so most people that send a question in should get some sort of answers tonight, and obviously try to do it in a reasonable time span and try and keep it moving. Then there's going to be obviously questions that's going to come up you want to bring with you, or there's questions that that'll happen that you'll think about while you're here. So what we want to do is try and keep under control, and also to make sure that we can hear the question. I've got a microphone here, so if you've got questions like Paul, please come up here, and then we'll address the stage and do it that way. We can all hear the answers, we can all hear the question. So if you've got a question, just come up and just come line up with me, and we'll make sure you get your question asked. Okay, so I've changed the order around some of these based on what we've heard. A couple of little things I think we need to get out there. Question here, the action by RBWN to remove the flood team. I know this isn't the biggest thing, but this is an issue on the day. They turned up late. They removed their flood team. It didn't feel like they worked together with them. Our intel and one of them seemed to be better than what they had. It seemed that all that they really did was to remove a couple of people from their homes, and then they sat around for 5 hours and then to go back. So we'd like to know who made that decision and to what end.
I'll just pick that up. At first, obviously, I'm acutely aware of the hard work that many local volunteers put in during the flooding, and our response team was in contact and trying to work closely with the local flood team. I'm not aware of any decision to remove the local flood team at any point during the response, and certainly if that happened, that wasn't the intention. So I think for me, it's actually during the debrief process, there's a real opportunity for us to learn those lessons, because it's really important that the council works in partnership with communities, with the local volunteers to deliver the response, and I think that's really important. So it certainly wasn't our intention, and if it was perceived that way, that's
yeah, it's very, very much. I mean, we had people working through the night, freezing cold, wet. You know, you see them fuming the next day the way they've been treated. So if it's going to be a debrief, can I suggest you talk to Dave Francis, first person on your list?
Absolutely. So
Can I respond to that just briefly? In terms of the flood team being removed and communication being stopped, we weren't physically removed, but we were told that we weren't allowed to publish information to the public as all communication had to come from the borough. So possibly the term removed is incorrect. However, the ethos is the same in that we were giving information to our residents on a very regular, very informative basis. And we were categorically told, you can't do that anymore, we're taking control. And it took over 6 hours of rising floodwater for there to be anything else published. And I think a lot of people, including myself, who run the social media for the flood team, felt that was excessively long. So that's
So do you mind taking that one away with the Dave and the flood team?
absolutely.
Get skin of that one, I think.
But that certainly shouldn't be the way that it
We
works.
need that flood team motivated, and they were very unmotivated at that point. Okay, so another question here. This one's for the Environment Agency. I'm going to cut the question down to the bottom line. We've been suffering now for 20 years. We've known about this for 20 years. We've been flooded 4 times. So what has physically been done to reduce the flood risk to Wraysbury?
Okay, happy to take this one. Thanks for the question. So there's been a number of different activities. I described some of them in my opener earlier around the role that we play in planning, the more more resilient properties that are in place, the greater take-up of flood warnings, people becoming engaged and aware and being able to reduce the impact of flooding when it happens. We've done a lot of good work with the local resilience forum that Chris has described, working with partners to fine-tune our emergency response so that the response can be better, quicker, earlier awareness of communities. We are now working on the Datchet to Hyde End Flood Improvement Measures project, which I mentioned. Of course, we've touched on here the earlier proposals around the Channel 1 of the River Thames scheme, which unfortunately wasn't going ahead, but we're looking at what other options there may be. And I can't provide any guarantees tonight, as with any scheme at the planning stage, but I'm hopeful and keen to work with you to establish what viable options there may be so that we can help reduce flood risk in future.
Okay, so why did you stop dredging?
So on dredging, so dredging, so the Environment Agency spends somewhere between, on an average year in the last 5 years, 45 to 55 million pounds a year on river maintenance activities across England. That includes removing blockages, vegetation management, it includes desilting, dredging. Within each year we do spend somewhere between 5 and 11 million pounds on dredging. Like any activity that we do and every scheme that we develop, it's underpinned by science and evidence and modelling where we understand what is going to be the most cost-effective option to reduce flood risk in this place. We take a number of things into account. So we look at whether it's going to be cost-effective. We look at, with dredging in particular, when you do dredging, you have to repeat it regularly, so it becomes very expensive very quickly. In most places, in most rivers in this country, it's not an effective way of reducing flood risk. And other methods, where the schemes are viable, or operation of weirs, operation of schemes, is usually a better option. There are some low-lying rivers where dredging is the answer, and like I say, we spend up to £11 million a year on average doing that. So we haven't got a decision, there's been no policy decision that says that dredging shouldn't happen. It's just a case of becoming more evidence-based and doing it where it makes a difference.
Okay, so
Going through the written questions first, please.
yeah, so there's two parts of another couple of questions here, which kind of working just quite nice. So I think there's a challenge in that you're saying that the Jubilee River doesn't cause a problem and dredging doesn't solve the problem. I don't think people believe that. How do we square that one off?
Yeah, so I'm really keen to, I think, frankly, we need to do a better job on our communications here, because we've got a lot of views out here that I know, I have evidence to prove, but we haven't been able to get the case across as well as I think we need to. So we've got a job on our hands, and I recognise that. I think on dredging, a specific example of some evidence is some bathymetric surveys. These are where we survey with LiDAR the bed levels of the River Thames. We last did that, I can't remember the exact date, but some point in the last decade when we did our last bathymetric surveys, and they show that actually the Thames is a very, I'm going to use a bit of a technical term, self-regulating river. So it naturally, as many rivers in this country, sediment gets collected, it gets generally taken out to sea or to the river, or out of a tributary into the main river, and over time it regulates itself. Dredging might make a very temporary difference, for a year, perhaps for 2. It's very expensive. The disposal of the material is highly expensive, and then it has to be done again. And at the same time, it's often environmentally damaging. So that bathymetric survey is the evidence that we're basing our decisions on. All our decisions on any investment are strictly governed by Treasury rules. We have to prove with any scheme or any action that we take that the benefits of doing it outweigh the costs of doing it. So it's not a decision just taken out of some sort of principle. It's a decision based on science, evidence, and Treasury rules about things having to be cost beneficial in order to proceed.
Okay, so I think we're trying to sort of tread a fine line between being aggressively questioning you and also maintaining enough rapport to work with you to get a good outcome for the village. But what I'm hearing, and just correct me if I'm wrong, is that the question was what's actually physically happened in the last 20 years. Apart from those surveys, the answer is nothing. Is that right?
Well, I think there have been improvements. So, in terms of a physical flood alleviation scheme, of course, you don't need me to tell you that there isn't one for Wraysbury at this stage in time. In terms of the work being done to develop one and look at options, I've described those. And there's wider work that we've done on, for example, on the River Thames weirs, which are a key part of actually managing the flood risk on the Thames. They play a dual role of supporting navigation of water resources, but also, as I described in my opener, we open the weirs to ensure that water can flow freely and naturally before a flood happens. There's been a lot of work on the weirs over that time. I recognise this isn't the silver bullet that people might want, and I'm sorry to say there is never a silver bullet with flood risk issues, but what I can say is that we are trying and working with partners to look at what options there are to reduce that flood risk.
Well, I think I've got some ideas to come back to you. So, another question. No, come up here. If you want to ask a question, wait till I finish these ones, and then you can ask a question. That's great, thank you. So, where was I then? Put me on now. I'm going to give Thames Water a go. So, thanks for what you explained earlier. You said it was largely successful. The problem is sealing the thing off. I don't know where I'm standing with this. So, is it possible to seal every manhole off? That's a question. The second question is, I think you're saying you're looking at that, and then you're going to come back, and then we need communication about what the solution might be. But how long do you envisage that process taking? So, is it possible to seal things? How long is that going to take? And then, what is the solution?
Yeah, thanks. Well, what we're trying to do is understand whether or not there's a way of adapting the vacuum system so that it can be sealed, because as I say, the design of it means that it needs to be vented in its current form. So we're going to do some work now to look at different innovations, different ways of seeing whether or not there's a way of sealing that system. If that's the case, then we will look at whether there's the ability to seal the manholes that are on the vacuum system. Now, I just want to be clear, if you think about the way that the vacuum system works, at the moment there's typically one vacuum pit outside about 6 properties, and then your gravity sewage system feeds into those pits. So we could seal each pit, but then there's the issue of the 6 properties that feed that pit all also need to be sealed on your own private sewage system. So, and that's the challenge we've got, is how do we seal the entire system and protect it? And we don't have the answer yet, but we need to look at what options we've got and come and talk to you about, is there anything more that we can do collectively to improve the situation, to make sure that, as I say, you can maintain services, but also that we don't get that contamination risk. And I say it's largely ingress that's coming in through the vacuum pits that we need to have access to in order to maintain the system. And I say they're not sealed. But also any private manhole that's on your property will also allow floodwaters into the system, and that's the challenge we face. So we don't have the answer. We're already talking about looking at options as to what more we can do. But what we are doing is supporting the Lower Thames scheme in order to try and, obviously our aim is to help prevent the problem at source and stop flooding in the first place. Because it's an incredibly difficult challenge to stop that force of nature getting into our system. So more to do, and I don't have any definitive timeframes other than we're working on trying to find improvement options, and we'll feed back to you once we've got some options to put on the table.
Do you think that might be this year, ready for next winter?
Absolutely, that will be our aim, is to improve before we get into the next winter, yes.
Thank you. Brilliant, thank you very much. That's brilliant. No, we've got a question. Come to you up here, yeah? Cheers. Right, okay, so I'm going to just change tack a little bit. I'm still going to focus on some of the things we can do and need to do, because rather than prevent the flood, how we deal with the flood. So this question was actually directed at EA Thames Water and RBWM, but I'm actually going to ask Di Krem to answer this question. I think she's got a better handle on it. So the question is, what's the plan for future flood events?
Thank you. I'm not going to answer on behalf of RBWN, Thames Water, etc., because they can answer their own plans about that. Certainly from a local point of view, we've been looking at the RBWN emergency plan, which isn't just flood, it's any emergency plan. and it's about dovetailing that plan downwards to the Wraysbury Parish Council strategic plan, and then actually to adopt an operational document which sets out the duties and responsibilities of the Wraysbury Flood team, the vulnerable team, etc. One of the things about the operational document is to actually take the stage a bit earlier if we can do, so do some of that preparatory work earlier in the day or days, so that we've things like contacting vulnerable people and putting things in place where we can from the vulnerable point of view, is doing that at an earlier stage. A plan's being drafted, as I said, it's an operational document, and it needs to sit separately, in my view, from a strategic document. The strategic document has all the principles and underlying ways of dealing with it and all the categories and stages. I think I'll ask RBWM to answer this about their own document. It appears to be a combination of strategic and operational directions and ways forward. But I think from a local level, it would be useful to separate the strategic document, which is Wraysbury Parish Council owned, from an operational document. The reason I'm saying that is because we need to have a strategic document that is, the principles are there and it doesn't need refreshing that often, and certainly it doesn't need contact names being updated and things like that. So Wraysbury Parish Council are refining that as we speak. And then an operational document will have contact names and details, and if that person's not available, who else would be stepping in for them if they were away or unavailable. But it would also have, as I said, these operational stages of what to do, when to do it. Trigger one, you know, when we get that first flood alert, what do we have to put in place there? It might be buying emergency food packs, things like that, buying the little camping toilets, etc. So we'll get everything ready before the flood actually occurs, and then we go to trigger 2 stage, and then we go to trigger 3 stage. So I won't go into the detail of that, but that's kind of what we're looking at the moment. But I will hand over to RBWM for their strategic document.
Before they do that, actually, Di, could I ask you another couple of quick questions based on that? So can we locally keep that vulnerable list up to date?
Simon, do you want to answer that? Simon's in charge of that list. He's doing it at the moment.
Hi, Darren. We've been trying very hard to amass a list of vulnerable people in the village, not just for floods, but for any event that might occur in the village, be it snow in the summer, extreme heat events, be it floods, obviously. So if you are, in your own view, you don't have a medical certificate, if you think yourself to be vulnerable or potentially vulnerable under any of those circumstances, please contact me personally. Don't go on Facebook, don't tell your neighbours, just phone me up, okay? My number's around the place, and let me know your name, details, etc. It'll be a closed document held only by me and Di. Nobody else will view it, except in an emergency, and then we'll know which areas of the village are affected, who's vulnerable, and make sure those people get targeted help to give them the protection they need. So please reach out. If you think you're vulnerable, or you know someone who's vulnerable, get them to reach out to us. We can put them onto the list.
Yes, somebody's mentioned on here that they've got Don's 1-year-old parent, mother with dementia, doubly incontinent, care package last 6 years, caseworker, not on the vulnerable list. Now, I'm assuming that's not your one. I'm assuming that's the RBWO one. How is it through the net?
I mean, I think the issue, of course, it's a moving, continually dynamic system, because somebody who is well this year, someone who's well in 2014, may now actually be very vulnerable. And I had a gentleman today who I'm made aware of, who's 94, lives in his own, but he says, I'm not vulnerable, I'm fine. And it's that. So it's very hard for us, so that's why we're trying to reach out and get people who, if you've got your mum who lives with you, you think she could be vulnerable, put her on the list. It's free. You know, we're not going to charge anybody. It's just we know then, come to the event, where people are and what the vulnerability might be, so we can make sure the emergency services or us can target them and make sure that they are protected and helped.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll pick up on a couple of those, because there's 2 different questions there. So there is a multi-agency Thames Valley-wide flood plan, which obviously we operate particularly on a Thames Valley-wide basis, but we also have our local adverse weather and flooding plan, which again was in use during this. I'll just reiterate the point I made before. We don't always get everything right. We want to learn from what happened this time to improve the plan, and we're very much keen to work with Wraysbury and other communities that were affected to improve those plans. So that's the purpose of the debrief process. We're going to be working with parishes, ward councillors, flood wardens to make sure we learn all the possible lessons from this. In terms of the specific point around vulnerable people, obviously, I just want to say the particular case here, we can only apologise, and we are, we work with our adult social care colleagues to refine and improve that list, so that we have that available for future emergency situations. But some people, will get missed in these type of scenarios, and I can only apologise for that.
Okay, thanks. So whilst you've got the microphone then, one of them goes to another WM one. Just moving slightly on into the Wraysbury drain. Now, I think we've been banging on about that since I've been in Wraysbury, about it being blocked. I believe it's RBWM's responsibility to enforce any nonsense from people filling it in or blocking it or whatever. So, after all these years, what can we expect going forward regarding the Wraysbury drain?
So we have fairly recently brought the flooding team back in-house, which is something that we've enacted since I've been at RBWM. We have got surveys and work going on in relation to the Wraysbury drain to identify where the blockages are and what work can happen. And I'd be expecting for us to be investing during next financial year to undertake some of those works, and we'll prioritise those based on what will be most effective in terms of clearing those blockages. So again, quite happy to continue to work with the Parish Council to keep you updated on that, and to I suppose work with you to identify the most effective things that we can do.
Talk to Dave. You can tell you tonight what the blockages are.
You say about your surveys, you've been doing surveys for 20 years. You must have come up with something. Just get it dug out, get it cleared. You're preventing so much work. We can drain our ditches, we can drain our land. Okay, the flood is at the same time. That's how it works. We need the recovery to work as quick as the flood happens.
And I completely understand that, and that's we'll be taking that forward.
When are you going to unblock it?
So is there going to be some work done this year on the drain?
That's the intention, is to undertake some works during the next financial year, yes.
You've had that good political training, haven't you?
We really hope that's the case, and this will be very well received if it is. Darren, can I suggest you take a couple of questions of the people standing behind you? They'll be standing there a while.
All right, well, I'm going to go back to a couple on here now, right? So, please, would you also just tell us your name and where you live, so we know that you're definitely a Wraysbury person.
Rich Marsh, Highland Road. For the Environment Agency, why did you allow tens of thousands of tonnes of concrete to be poured onto a flood zone 3B in Highland End?
Right.
Can I just check, Reg, are you referring to the Fowles site or something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you may be aware that we have reissued, or there's a new permit for that site a couple of years ago now, and as part of that, the site has to provide us with a flood plan, which we're currently in the midst of assessing. We have done some modelling.
Not the current one, the previous one. It's over a metre higher than it was. So online data. You know that, I know that.
Yeah, so...
And that's on a flood zone 3B, which should never be built on?
Absolutely. So, as a general principle, we absolutely don't want flood zones having development in them, or if things are being redeveloped, like I touched on earlier, we want to do it in a resilient way so that we improve the flood risk. For this site, we've had a team working on this for a long time. My colleagues in my neighbouring area, Hartlepool, North London area, we have done some modelling to establish whether it increases risk in that area, and the risk.
You know it increased the risk. Your people your people told us it increased the risk, but it wasn't by enough.
So if we were...
It was by centimetres. You know how many properties in our road flooded by centimetres? 4.
And they were running the whole time while houses were flooded.
Yeah. You know, you've got to, if you've got these criteria, flood zone 3B should never be built. You allowed it to happen. So rather than do any alleviation in Highland Road, you've actually made it worse.
Yeah.
I appreciate the level of feeling on this one. I mean, you know, the data that we've got on this suggests that that increase in risk is negligible. But of course, we wouldn't want...
You confided in us. You shouldn't have, but not you, but your team confided in us. So we know what it was, and you just went ahead and did it. So I'm sorry, you're not helping us. Anything you do now won't reduce it by 5 centimetres.
Well,
it's crazy. What you're doing is crazy. You know, and to RBWN, I mean, your planning department needs sorting out because I look at Scarthorne, and what are they doing? They're closing down sites that are raising land and everything, left, right and centre, and putting them back down. And in RBWM, they've never done that. We've got a site that's at the moment a field that's been raised by 1/2 metre, flood zone 3A. What's been done? 213 slapped on it and nothing more. Why not a stop notice? Why not call? Why not get them to clear it? This is flooding. This is important to us. It flood, and the reason, and the Wraysbury drain is another one. Planning has known about that since 2018. 2018 and done nothing about it. It's been culverted. You don't have to clear that. You get the people that culverted it to clear it. Ardmore and BCP. You know, this is illegal stuff that is happening, and you're doing nothing about it. You know, come on, get your act together. We can have all this chat and everything. It means nothing.
Clifford Warren, number 8 Brown Close, born and bred in Wraysbury in Willie Road. More of a question actually. The first I knew about flooding was in 1947 when I was a 3-year-old. And the question is, did we used to dredge the river before then? In the 40s, the 30s?
Yes.
Yes. Because I found a book in the classroom at Wraysbury School in the High Street when I was about 14 or so, and it said there was no dredging done because all the people that done that was in the war, in the services, so that didn't happen. That's why the 47 flood happened worse, as it was. And then since then they started dredging the river till recently, well, so recently. And I do believe they've done this Jubilee River thing and all that, but I still think they should have carried on dredging the river. And I think, was the river dredged before in the 30s and things? Because there was no problems with flooding then in Wraysbury. Told. I reckon they should go back to doing it. That's all my opinion. That's all I can say.
Can I say a couple of points in response? Thank you for sharing that. I think just a couple of points to say. I mean, the history of flooding throughout the Thames Valley, throughout the country, does go through periods where, if you look back over the last 200 years or so, typically you might see several major flooding periods all in a 10-year period, in 10 years or so, and then a decade or two with nothing. It's inherently not something you can predict and say will happen every X number of years, and so that does lead to sort of a perception sometimes that there's a cause and effect between what different ways that this was done or that was done. There was an emphasis on dredging nationwide throughout much of the 20th century, up until the sort of 60s, 70s in particular, because the emphasis really was very much placed on food production, getting the water away from fields as quickly as possible. Rivers could flow quickly, which actually in some cases increases flood risk downstream because you're sending the water downstream to people who live in more vulnerable areas. We touched on dredging earlier. I'm not sure, sir, if you were here for part of that discussion, so I'm not going to repeat myself on the dredging point, but I think what we're seeing tonight, and I'm not surprised to see it, is just a couple of points where we have we have differing opinions on the risks and on the cause and effect of some of this flooding. And finally, just on the fouls point, absolutely accept the strength of feeling there. I could hear it, I could see it in the round of applause. I'm confident from the data and the information that we've got with the view that I gave, but I think we can do more to help share that in a compelling way. So I'll take a note here and we'll go back to the team on it. So please rest assured that I've heard you and recognise how important it is to all of you. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just ask a quick real follow-up on that?
Yeah, I don't think it's just the fouls thing. The Ovney Lake has now been developed as well, which is in Highland as well. I think the Environment Agency objected to that, and the Secretary of State has overruled which they can. So there's even further development in that area where we're losing floodplain and having land raised and concrete built. So could you take that away and have a look at that and actually commit, if the Environment Agency told the Secretary of State not to develop that area or not? Because we haven't had an answer from that, and we have asked that question a few times.
Yeah, very happy to take that away and have a look. We'll look at the details for you. I have to say, in my experience, it's extremely rare that happens, but it has happened in a couple of cases where we've had Secretary of State decision overturn our objections, but it's nationally, fortunately, a very rare thing, but we'll look into that one for you.
Just on that one, we've tried to request details of the licence that's been granted. We suspect that it wasn't being used appropriately because as soon as we started to apply pressure, the ULEZ camera vans disappeared. So I don't think they've got anything to do with national road infrastructure. So they sort of got out of the way, but still, we went to see some of the tenants down there, but they're sort of going with tenants. We understand that there's a new owner coming, whether it's imminent, there's going to be a new owner. They're completing on that, we just talk to them. So we want to stay close to you. I know you're getting a bit of a drubbing tonight, but we do want to stay close to you. We do need you to work with us on all of this.
Absolutely.
But it moves us on to a little bit, quite a nice segue into, back to RBWN. Sorry about this. Planning, we talked about planning, we talked about enforcement. With there's loads of properties going up in the village that shouldn't be there. I spoke to an enforcement officer saying there's a house gone up that's a dwelling for living in, it's no planning permission. And the person on the phone said to me, I spoke to them and they said there's nobody living there, and that was the end of it. No visit, no nothing. And so, do we actually follow through on enforcement? Have we got anybody in enforcement going out actually visiting sites and actually taking people to court, making these things happen and actually preventing this? Because at the moment it feels a bit like a free-for-all.
Not there now, right?
So the council does have a planning enforcement team. We operate on a kind of complaints-led approach to planning enforcement. So the team will investigate any complaints that are made and follow up on those about alleged breaches of planning permission and planning control. In line with the adopted enforcement policy, I'm quite happy to follow up on specific cases with the parish council and take that away. What we don't have is that kind of, particularly around because of the funding situation and the challenging financial situation, we don't have that proactive enforcement and monitoring that happens because we don't have a large enough team to do that. But I'm quite happy to take that away and work with the parish council to follow up with colleagues within planning on particular cases.
Could we ask you to support us with talking to the new owners and Secretary of State about the Ovney Lake, because we want to get the details of that licence. We think that it's probably being used a wee bit, we don't know for sure. It doesn't have to run through for another 20 years, we could end quicker. But I just think there's got to be a collegiate way we can work together to get that sorted out, because they've risen that ground a long way up, and it makes it very difficult when someone puts a granulated planning permission through, as councils are going, but we're on the floodplain. It's a bit of a joke when you've got that going on up the road, do you know what I mean? So we do need some support, I think, from various agencies.
absolutely happy to work with the Parish Council to support that. What I will say is that we probably don't have any greater influence on the Secretary of State than you do, but we will absolutely do our best to work with you to try and get the information that you need.
Okay, thanks. And then the other thing you said was it was our intention to do some work on the drain, right? I'm going to keep banging on about this one. So intention also means it might not happen. So what would have to happen in order for it not to happen? What's in the way?
So I suppose, as I said, we're doing survey work and the investigation. If that came forward and said it's going to cost £10 million to do it, then obviously we have to review that. But we do have a high risk drainage and flooding budget within the capital programme. That is within the draft budget that will be considered by Cabinet and Council. So therefore, provided we're not talking about sort of large figures, then we have the money in the budget to do some of those works.
My budget's probably a few 100,000 rather than several million, and this is a short-term thing to try and alleviate the problem. So it feels to me like Dave's got the local knowledge. We need EA to help with the survey kind of stuff and information, and then back to you to say, look, this is what it's going to cost. And could we kind of get that whole thing going? That would be brilliant. Get that.
Yeah, that work is being commissioned and started. So
brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so I'm just trying to get a little bit.
Sorry, I've just been told we've got 12 minutes till the end of questions on the timetable. So can we
I'll jump into the next
move on a bit, please?
Okay, so then on to the big one. I think we're all believe that the only way to really help reduce the risk is to reinstate RTS1. I wanted to ask this question to you, really, but I'll probably wrong borough. Sorry, mate. How do we do that? How do we reinstate RTS1? What's the best way to go about it?
So I'm sure that Joe will also have a view on this. So as part of the River Thames scheme, I think they've been quite clear as a project that they won't be reinstating Channel 1 into their project because they're proceeding into the development consent order process. Channel 1 will be one of the options that is considered as part of the Datchet to Hythe End flood improvement measures. So the best way to make that happen is to work with us on the Datchet to Hythe End programme, work with ourselves and the Environment Agency through that process. There will be opportunities. I think we're setting up a community liaison group that is taking place shortly, and there'll be some further consultation in the summer around a long list of options that we'll be looking to develop into a short list. I don't know, Joe, whether you wanted to add anything more.
Tiny bit, if I may. You covered it really, really well, Chris, so just a tiny bit to add. So absolutely agree with everything that Chris said there. The current River Thames scheme project is proceeding quite rapidly and has a statutory consultation underway for the development consent order. So the only thing I wanted to add was that I know from some of the correspondence we've been receiving recently, including from Wraysbury, some people have asked about how they can input to that. So there are a set of public events taking place now. The information's all available on the River Thames scheme website. So if you want to make your views heard, then please do. The consultation's open to everybody. But as Chris said, that the RTS project has its position, which is the Channel 1 decision has happened. And as Chris said, the focus now is the Datchet to Hythe End project. And I've mentioned it too many times, but yeah, keen to work with you all on that. Thank you.
Okay, so I do have a feeling that we're going to have to get the villages together. I think we probably need to do something a bit stronger than just a few petitions on this one. So I don't know what the energy in the room's like, but are we prepared to talk with our feet? Yes. Just raise a hand and kind of up for doing something, not like friendly, but to show that strength of feet. I think it's important that we do that, and we work together with Datchet and Porton and also with Old Windsor. Okay, well, it's good to see that. I think energy there on that one.
I think that's it's probably time to open it up to questions from the floor now for about 20 minutes.
I'll just do that thing, Rick.
Well, yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to test that. Okay, so you have to watch it. Right, this is Paul Patel. Tell me.
No, it's fine. I live on Brookside Avenue.
You just jumped the queue.
Faces hard to miss with that hair.
Okay, right, I'll get on with it, I won't anyway. There's actually 2 points I wanted to raise. One that a few people may have seen, so Thames Water do a water draw, don't they? And they take water, I appreciate your waste, and that might be a different department to you, but they take water off the Thames quite a lot, and quite often at low tide, and cause boats to dredge and boats to suck up silt. But ironically, when the river was at full capacity, the Jubilee was at full capacity, the Wraysbury drain was flooded, surface water everywhere, they had reservoirs empty, and there were pictures of that all over. Now that is a disgrace, and I was told, confidentially, it's because they don't want dirty water. Cool. They want nice clean water. Cool. And actually, that is completely unfair, and that just makes you look ridiculous. That's my first point, please answer that in a minute. But my second, answer that first. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not an expert on what's been happening in this area recently. I used to be, but not to that specific point. I mean, just to explain the point you raised around the irony of not taking water when it's raining, just to explain what that is. So, the reservoirs where we store our water through the winter months in preparation for the summer, we have to sample the water to make sure that it's not contaminated. And obviously with runoff in particular in these circumstances where we've got huge rainfall, runoff from fields, and also where we've got flooding obviously, we can get very high levels of nitrates, we can get E. coli in the water as well. And therefore, if we put that into our reservoirs, that's great, but then we can't treat it. So we have to look at the quality of the incoming water and make sure that we're storing water that we can then ultimately treat, because otherwise we've got a reservoir full of water that's no use in the summer. So I don't know for sure. My suspicion is and I'll check and take that one away and speak to my colleagues. But in a number of circumstances, we will find, and it's not just here, it will be across all of our reservoirs, there are, in most cases, are full ready for next summer already, but say we only draw water when the quality reaches certain standards, because we can't treat it. The water treatment works are not designed to deal with the level of contamination. And what happens when
can you design them to deal with the level of contamination? Because a lot of that contamination has come from the Environment Agency letting people pollute the rivers in the first place.
Yes, it's the fact that because the level of rain that comes at once and then the flow washes everything down with it, as you say, so the level of contamination that comes through, obviously we want to make sure we've got good quality water in our reservoirs so that we can treat it. So I'll take the point away. I say I don't know the exact answer. I suspect it's in line with what I've said, but if it's not, I'll come back to you and feed that back.
Yeah, thank you. So the other point is quite quick, but I think this really affects probably most people in this room. Sorry, I didn't catch the name of the guy from RBWM, but you said that you admitted you had a multi-agency meeting on the 3rd of January, which is the Wednesday. Now, I could see that there was loads of flooding, and friends upriver told me. I put on a post on Wraysbury News showing pictures of floods, but our flood team weren't given part of that information. They couldn't put out any communications themselves and whatever. Why the late notice? Because, you know, a lot of people didn't realise it was an issue until it was an issue, which meant that all their preparation time, instead of having preparation time and planning, they had panic. And nobody wants to make decisions in panic and have to do things in a panic and decide what possessions they want to keep, what possessions they don't want to. So please, if you're having an emergency meeting, you've identified there may be an emergency, tell us.
Right, just to the EA. Sorry, just to EA. Sorry, you can answer the question. Sorry, Kevin.
I'm not.
Yeah, just to pick up on the point, obviously, in an event of a flood, particularly the main river floods, the EA are the lead agency, and they were providing updates through us, and we were providing that on through to parishes and flood wardens on the expected level of flooding. Obviously we have the flood alert and flood warning systems, and they were all being communicated out. The information, I suppose, prior to the weekend and over the weekend was actually expecting a lower level of flooding. It was only as we moved into the week of I think it was Monday the 8th of January, where a combination of the levels in the River Thames, the water in the Colnbrook and the groundwater position started to effectively raise the level of risk in Wraysbury. So actually it was quite late in the day, and that uncertainty around how the water was behaving meant that I suppose the message around the seriousness of the situation in Wraysbury was late. Obviously we can only work off the information that we have, and over the course of that weekend we were being told that the river levels actually were lower than the 2014 levels, but by the time we got through to Monday, particularly sort of the middle of the day on Monday, the information we were getting locally and I suppose the combination of effects in terms of our conversation with the EA raised that level of risk significantly, and that was why I suppose the emergency response stepped up on that Monday.
Thanks, Chris.
I'd just like to add a really brief point. That was a really good question, thank you. So this just touches on the point around flood warning service, which is around main river flooding. So there was a flood alert out for the Colnbrook from the 2nd of January, and the Thames was a bit later in that week once we got that heavy rain, but we have had reports around some people starting to experience flooding earlier in the week, particularly from groundwater. Really, really challenging to measure and manage groundwater flood risk. It's open to all of you to look online and see river gauges, the Environment Agency gauges are published online. You can see your river levels. There are communities that phone us before an alert is even issued in some places, because they are looking at those levels all the time. So I'd encourage anyone who is interested in that to take a look at that themselves, and you can see what's happening. But for groundwater, we just haven't got that level of coverage. The Environment Agency doesn't offer a warning service for that, and I think it's really important that we pick this up as part of the debriefs that Chris has already described, because we want to look at, as a partnership, as a group of partners, well, and with you as a community, well, what are the local indicators that groundwater is rising, and how can we be better, all of us, be better at understanding those early triggers so that you can act on them. And this comes down to every individual. We talked about plans earlier. Personal flood plans are just as important as all the authority flood plans, understanding your risk and knowing what you'll do. So I just wanted to, this is a good chance for me to add that in, but thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, hi, sorry, from the EA, you sort of mentioned that you didn't have enough information, about the flooding that's going to happen in the area, but you've had 4 floods already that have happened. So surely there must be some data that you can get from that you can work out what's going wrong in this particular area, because it seems to be a sacrificed area. Regarding RBWM, I just want to make this point quickly before I leave. Your customer service is absolutely crap. Because when we rang them, although you've told the flood wardens, not to say anything for 6 hours or whatever, we were told by customer service to go and speak to the flood wardens. So I don't know what's going on within your organisation, but you do need to take a look at it, because your flood service was absolutely shite. And I worked for Wraysbury Parish Council, and we had a lot better flood service than you guys did, and we were covering Chertsey. So I have to say, your organisation, you need to have a serious look at. That's all I wanted to say. Good night.
Our time's up, but we'll let Henry have the last word.
Lovely, thank you. Henry Perez and Cottage Drive. And on a grade of what's been happening here and the questions that have been happening, I'm taking it down a peg because mine is minimal compared to what's happening. But it is personal to myself, so that's why I'm going to ask it anyway. It is with the EA, please. And in 2014, following the floods, I applied for the EA's property level flood protection, and I had doors fitted, flood doors fitted, and also panels. The panels come out every time we get a flood alert or a flood warning, and I'll put them in situ since I've had them, and then when we get the all clear, they come back out again. But they've never been tested. The first time they were tested was on the 8th of January, when we had the water that actually reached the garage, and I walked in just when it reached the garage, and it started to leak in there. So I got on to my two sons who came up, they manned the pump to put the water back out over the flood. While they were doing that, I phoned White House, which was the contractor that put it in for the EA, and I was told that they were only maintained for 1 year. That was by the receptionist. So what I did after that, I've since phoned the company and spoken to one of the managers who confirmed that they're only maintained for a year. So I would ask the EA if you could go back and look at your contracts with flood defences. We didn't need ours from 2014 until the 8th of this month. And like I say, they've not worked. What I'm doing now, I have written to the EA and I've told them the problem. And what I'm saying is, where do I go from here? Because I've now got flood protection barriers, which I know don't work. My confidence in the doors which have been fitted has now been reduced. And when I looked into the company that had produced ours, it was our consultants, is that right? EA, they were made by ARC, and they wrapped up a couple of years ago. So I've got equipment which they will not look at White House because it was only maintained for a year, and I've got next floods to look forward to. So I will be applying for the grant, if there is one, to replace the boards which have been paid for by the EA, but are no good to me because they don't work. But I would just feed that to you to think about, because I might be the only one that's happened to, but there might be others as well that have had...
Same situation.
Same situation. Thank you. Yeah, lovely. Thank
you. I'm really sorry to hear about your experiences there. That sounds really...
Two good sons that worked because the pumps that we had, one came from Tracy, thank you Tracy, and Keith, our one that we had lasted for about 4 hours and then packed up. But they need to be in the depth of water, otherwise they burn out. So my two sons were a rotor, pumping the water out and then stopping the machine so that it came back in again, restarted it. But yeah, thanks for your sympathy.
Well, yeah, sorry that happened. Just a brief couple of points on property flood resilience, which is the latest term for these kinds of measures, which you can put in your house. There are different types. There are some which prevent flood water getting in or delay it from getting in, and there are others which are resilience measures, so things like moving plug sockets up the walls, building flooring, which is much more quick to recover from flooding. They have grown in popularity, and I have to say the technology has improved drastically, even in the last 10 years, really, really significantly. So I think we were still seeing cases that unfortunately have sounded similar to yours, where some of the materials that were installed sort of around a decade ago haven't got a very long life or haven't worked quite as intended. I'm pleased to say there is a new Environment Agency framework of contractors across England, which actually launched just earlier this month for property flood resilience measures, which is open to the local flood authorities. So our partners in local authorities also can access that framework. And I've heard positive feedback about its prospects and its ability, but I recognise that doesn't help you in your current situation. I do just one more brief thing on property flood resilience. As I say, the technology has improved. Anyone who wants to know more about this, there's a couple of really good places to look. So the National Flood Forum website, just look up National Flood Forum, loads of guidance, pointers about where you can get grants for some of this stuff, where you might be able to fund it yourself, and where you might be eligible for grant through the Environment Agency or your local authority. So I'd encourage you to look at that. There's also a partnership called Be Flood Smart, which is a partnership between the Environment Agency, Flood Re, which is a sort of overarching insurance company conglomerate, and others, promoting the importance of installing these measures whenever anyone here next redoes the kitchen or redoes any of the house. It's actually not too expensive often to add these measures in. Adding them in retrospectively after a flood can be, but if you're doing your house up anyway, it's a great opportunity to make your house more resilient. So if you said you've written to the EA already, I'd be very happy to chat at the end if we have a moment. I'll just make sure that your query gets through to the right person. But thank you for raising it.
Brilliant, thank you. Can I just then summarise what we've got from that section there, just to make sure we're all clear, as a council we can take away. So I think with the EA, we need a bit convincing that the Jubilee River doesn't do anything, and the dredging doesn't have any, has very little impact. So if those two things are marginal, we need to understand that one, so we can stop going on about it. At the minute, I think there's a bit of a difference of opinion. I think the other thing then is Thames Water, thankfully, grateful for coming. You said you're going to have a look at this solution, potentially sealing. So I think we've kind of got the feeling you're going to have that kind of looked at this year for us. This is something we can implement before the end of next year. And then the other bit is that three-way thing here. So the drain, Dave Ross can tell you where the blocks are. EA probably needs to then price up what that's going to cost and all the rest of it. Then talk to RBW about finding the money to do that. I can't believe it's going to be that expensive that we can't find that money. I know there's a massive overdraft at RBWM, but I can't believe that this can't be done. So, but we just need to make it happen. So we really do need to use this energy we've got now to get started on that straight away, so that we've got some work done to alleviate that to some degree before next winter. So is that kind of what we've got to on that one? Yeah? Okay, and then the last bit, I think there's a feeling in the room that I think we need to work together with other villages to find a way, whatever that might be. We'll have to defer to Ewan's greater knowledge, but we want to get the strength in numbers to force a reinstatement of RTS1, and I think that can be done as a combined village effort. So I think that's kind of what we've got to do. Right? Brilliant, thank you.
I just want to make one quick comment. Which is cheaper, to spend 48 million on Channel 1 or continue for the next 20 years to spend money on the consequences of flooding? All these meetings, all the angst, all the volunteers, if the flooding isn't there, there's no need to spend the money. We had to get police in from Hampshire because our local, from the marine unit, or because our local police don't have the proper safety equipment to go in flood water if there's a problem. So this is a tragedy, is that the 48 million it would require is not, it's cheaper to build up the Plymouth Section 1, Channel 1, it's cheaper.
I fully agree with you, but the decision is made by politicians, not by officers. And as I explained earlier, it was the previous administration that dropped it and cancelled it. And I'm very disappointed tonight, actually, that there's no senior councillor from the Royal Borough here. We invited the leader of the council, and no one's here. Yes, well, we've run out of time now. We can't talk all night, but we will go through them. They will all get responses. Yes, yes. So the next thing on the agenda is over to Councillor Larkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Of course you can. Trust and confidence in politicians. This is what the problem is. We lost Channel 1 because a couple of politicians behind the scenes spoke to the sponsoring group for years and said that the borough would put money into the scheme. And then at October 2019, it was announced that the River Thames scheme was fully funded and would go forwards. Then I was thrown off the Thames Regional Flood and Coastal Committee because I started asking questions. What did I ask? Where's the money? There wasn't any money. And in about July the 30th, 2020, former Councillor Cannon had to come along to our parish council meetings and say, sorry, no River Thames Scheme Channel 1. You have been dropped in it for years, absolute years. Okay, so I've got my 8-page presentation. It's all in writing, and I'll put it on the web for you, so you can go and see it and read between the lines, and there's loads of links in there as well. So www.dhw, which is Statue Horton Wraysbury, news, all one word, .com, and it's all there, and there's loads of links for you. And it goes right back to my Jubilee River Index, which has hundreds of pages going back to the last century, absolutely hundreds. And I'll give you a couple that you won't be very happy about. Aldermaston. Do you know what Aldermaston is? It's where we manufacture and maintain our nuclear weapons, just the other side of Reading. They poured low-level liquid waste into the Thames through 2 pipes. They pumped it from Aldermaston to Pangbourne, out to the centre of the river, and just pumped it into the Thames for 50 years. 50 years. And you wonder why the sediment is designated hazardous liquid waste. It's probably, you have to look at their faces. Hazardous liquid waste is the most expensive to get rid of. You ask, is it radioactive? Oh, we have no evidence of that. Well, have you tested it? No, we don't test it. Need I say any more? And you wonder why they won't take water up into the reservoirs during flooding. And you wonder why they won't dredge. Because upstream, all the fields are washing into the rivers and being washed down here and past here out to the Thames estuary, where of course they do dredging in the Thames estuary. Yes? Yeah, probably. We are left out here. Removing the River Thames Scheme Channel 1, the River Thames Scheme is not a coherent project. It is not logical. It's got a big gap in it. We already suffered from 2003 onwards, and we're going to suffer again. And I probably won't be here because I'm 73 now. But what they don't like is the fact that I am here now, and I've been on this officially since 1992, and I can prove it when I don't stand in front of the mic. Sorry, speaker. This is the report, the inspector's report from the 1992 inquiry at Reading. Went on for 6 weeks. There's a good bit in there that says, from the inspector's mate, the assessor, the hydraulic expert, he said it would be very embarrassing for all concerned if the new flood relief channel didn't carry its design capacity. Well, it doesn't. It never did, and it never will be able to. It was designed to carry 215 cubic metres of water per second. Today, I think 180 is probably the maximum. Not only that, it fell apart. Every structure was damaged from one end to another on first use in January 2003, or thereabouts. Even today, the thing is still falling apart. Go and look at the Merck embankment. The close woven geotextile reinforcement in the embankment is all exposed. There are lumps of gravel falling out of the embankment. You have to walk along a public footpath. And in fact, one of the things that I have noticed is where the Jubilee River, as it was called, and they have changed the name, by the way, it's now the Jubilee River, Jubilee Flood Channel or something. It's been covered up and fenced in, so you can't see it and you can't get to it. And yet it was sold on the basis of environmental enhancements. And that's exactly what they're doing with the River Thames scheme. Selling it to the people on the other side of the river, not us, because there's a geopolitical boundary. They can have money. they can have £230 million from their county council as partnership funding, and we don't get 53 million from our little Royal Borough Unitary Authority. Okay, it's people power now. Mr. Bates has shown us what can be done. When you get focused, when you're all pulling in the same direction, you can expose these people for what they are. You really can, and we're going to do that. We are going to do that.
So Ewan, I'm sort of spend loads of energy, you know, making someone look bad from 10 years ago. But what should we do right now to get some momentum on this? What's the first thing we can do right now to start getting RTS1 back onto track?
Now, well, not RTS1. The priority has to be the Wraysbury drain. It was at least 4 years ago when I reported it for the first time, and reported it relatively recently, and it's still in the same state. It won't take much in terms of effort or money to put it right. That's my opinion as a professional engineer for all my life. And we have another engineer sitting behind you, by the way. That's Ian Thompson, who was there with me at the public inquiry in 1992. Okay, so just put your names so that if you're a Royal Borough resident, just stick your names on the petition. We've got nearly 500 now. All we need is 1,000, and then I can stand up again in front of the merry mob in St Ives Road up in Maidenhead and tell them what I think of them. And I do. I got on as a borough council back in 2019. Knocked out a Conservative. May last year, 2023, I got on with an increased majority. And there aren't any Conservatives. And you go to the borough, where are the Conservatives? Gone. They are, I think there's 7 left. And that shows you it's a sign of the times. If the politicians do not look after the people, what more can you expect? You are the ones with the power. At the end of the day, it is you. When you put your signatures, crosses on your bits of paper, you have the power. But it's not very often. Today, you have the power. The Environment Agency have raised the pre-application, the mandatory pre-application consultation for the nationally significant infrastructure project development consent order. It has to go to the planning inspectorate. Now we will see if enough people here object to it because it's not coherent or it doesn't suit us or whatever reason you want. If there's enough people, they might actually look at it. But you have a bit of difficulty because the merry mob didn't make it easy. In fact, they made it almost impossible for you to respond to the consultation. There is no paperwork here. They haven't set up any events here. They've absolutely abandoned us. Absolutely abandoned us. Okay, the first consultation event opened today in Egham. There is a great list of them that you can go to. You can ask the questions, but they'll all be the other side of the river. So you'll have to put yourself out. River Thames scheme. Dredging. They don't want to dredge, costs money. Even in 1992, the dredgers were on the riverfront in Datchet, dredging continuously for the whole length of time, the 6 weeks when we were in Reading. When the Environment Agency took over from the National Rivers Authority in 1996, the first thing they did was dispose of the dredgers and the dredger operators and the dredging disposal facilities. And they didn't tell anybody. There was no consultation. We've already heard there is no policy to not dredge, I think.
Yeah, we do dredge.
Yeah, there is no policy to not dredge. They do not dredge because they don't want to dredge. Dredging's too expensive. You want me to finish? Go on my website, dhwnews.com. Find the links. Go and look. There's hundreds and hundreds of pages in my Jubilee River index of stories that you would not believe. And 3 cheers to Mr. Bates. Thank you.
these three motions which we propose, they don't carry any weight, they just indicate the sentiment of the meeting. I think we can take all three of them together actually. Reinstatement of River Thames Scheme Channel 1, clearance and unblocking of the Wraysbury drain, and reinstatement of main river dredging in the River Thames. Can I ask all those in favour to put their hands up? Thank you. I won't try and count them. All those against, put their hands up, please. Thank you. I think I can declare that to be unanimous. And then all the meetings are closed. Thanks very much for our guests for coming and listening to us. Very much appreciated. Thank you everyone for behaving politely.